So since we are falling behind the schedule, I think we can just jump right in and then start the session. Okay, so in this session, we have 4 speakers, and this panel is broadly going to expound on Tibetan language, arts, and literature. So, okay, so I'm just going to lay it out there how things are going to pan out during the course of this panel. So you will have 20 minutes to speak. So when the 15 minutes has elapsed, I'll ring this thing and then try to wrap your presentation within the 5 minutes that we have left. And then in the end, we will have a question and answer session, so we'll take collective questions after that. So I'm going to keep my intervention to minimal. So to begin with, we have the first speaker, who is Samir Hasan, and he is the research scholar at Tilka Manjhi Bhagalpur University in Bihar. And he's going to be speaking on representation of Tibetan life in exile through films and literature. So, Mr. Hasan, so you have 20 minutes. You can do it from anywhere, so you can, yeah. Are you comfortable doing it there or here? Either way is fine, okay.
Good morning. Hello. Okay. So, good morning, everyone. First of all, sir, and everyone here, very warm good morning. First of all, I'm very honored to be the first speaker because I'm from Bodh Gaya, born and brought up. So, this culture, this issue has always been a part of my life. And before I begin my paper, something I wanted to say is, people always say, ki, why is Tibet, very important. So all the answers we get is the history, the culture. But what I say is, it was home. It was home for people since time immemorial, till, let's say, living memory. Once that was gone, a lot of culture, a lot of rituals, a lot of delicacies, a lot of cuisines, they start going away. So how do you make people remember them? That's where people like us, literature students, come in. Now, before, when I was preparing for this, I had the opportunity to get a screening of the movie Sun Behind the Clouds in Bodh Gaya. I wanted to search that movie so that I could watch it again and read this. I'd like to all of you to take out your phones after this and try looking for that movie. You won't find it anywhere. When these pieces of literature and movies go away, it's our responsibility to make sure these things are talked about, to make sure these things remain in the memory of the people. Anyways, I'll just begin with my paper. So, Tibetan diaspora is one of the most moving episodes of forced exile in South Asia in probably the last century. And the upheaval after the People's Republic of China invaded Tibet, and the forced persecution of Tibet culture, religion, and political sovereignty. The situation culminated in 1959 Tibetan uprising, during which the 14th Dalai Lama, His Holiness, had to escape to India with thousands of people. This event triggered a large departure of Tibetans, resulting in the formation of Tibetan communities in exile, principally in India, Nepal, Bhutan. And last month I had the opportunity to visit Mussoorie, and then I went to Chandigarh. I think the place was called Main Part. And since I had prepared for this, so in Main Part, if you visit, there is a huge settlement of there. So what came into my mind back then was, if people from one place are displaced and they are scattered, and then the third generation lives, so somewhere the children growing in, say, here, and those who are growing in Chandigarh, so the core culture of the whole culture, the whole Tibetan identity, it starts getting diluted over generation. For example, if as a writer, the third generation writer may not be able to depict the life of Tibet because he has never lived it. And even the person who is going to live it are like, they are going away. So the Tibetan exile experience has been expressed in a variety of cultural genres, most notably in literature and films. These mediums have become critical in telling the story of Tibet's fight, the agony of relocation, the strength of the Tibetan spirit. Through these artistic portrayals, the world has acquired insight into Tibetans' living experience in exile, their ongoing connection to the motherland, and their search for identification in a world far from their ancestral home. Understanding these representations is critical for understanding the intricacies of Tibetan diaspora and the broader effects of exile on cultural identity. Building on historical framework, that we have to investigate how Tibetan life in exile is portrayed in film and literature. The Tibetan diaspora's unique experience of displacement and culture preservation has been chronicled, represented in ways, but films and literature stand out as especially effective mediums for communicating the emotional and psychological component of the exile. These narratives not only provide the Tibetan people a voice, but they act like as a link between Tibetan community and the rest of the world. The primary goal was to investigate how cinema and literature portray the daily realities and struggle and aspirations of Tibetan living in exile. So, we examine a significant literary texts and films to identify recurring themes and motives that characterize these representations. Particularly, emphasis should be placed on how these projects depict the culture and identity preservation, a sense of loss, and a longing for home. The continual struggle for political and spiritual freedom, we should also look at these artistic forms to help to shape the communal memory and identity of the Tibetan diaspora. Understanding the portrayal of Tibetan life in exile is critical for a number of reasons. For starters, it enables more nuanced understanding of how displaced population deal with the challenge of retaining cultural continuity while adapting to new circumstances. Second, these representations offer important insight into the psychological and emotional components of the exile, which are sometimes disregarded in political and historical interpretations. We should focus also on the cinema and literature and the emphasis on the significance of narratives and developing both individual and collective identities as well as fostering unity and awareness among the international audience. The significant contribution of films include the study of documentaries and fictional depiction of Tibet lives. Films such as Kundun and The Cup have been thoroughly examined, and scholars like David L.S. Barman, S.J. Gary have been studied on how these films reflect the Tibetan struggle for autonomy and cultural identity, frequently contrasting them with daily realities of Tibetan exile. Barman's research criticizes Western cinematic depiction of Tibetan culture, claiming that they reinforce exotic and stereotype ideas. Gary's studies, on the other hand, offers a more nuanced examination on how these films portrayed the issue of exile and cultural assimilation. Overall, while existing research shed light on how Tibetan life in exile is portrayed, a more complete evaluation that considers both literary and cinematic perspectives are required, and this gap underlines the opportunity for additional investigation on how these many mediums overlap and contribute to the larger story of Tibetan exile. Despite considerable contribution, the study of Tibetan life in exile through literature and films, these notable gaps are existing studies that require additional investigation. One major weakness is the inadequate integration of comparison analysis across multiple media forms. While these individual studies have thoroughly investigated Tibetan literature or films, there is a dearth of comprehensive research that juxtaposes and contrasts different mediums to better understanding of how they collectively depict the Tibetan exile. Such comparative research should shed light on how literature and films complement and diverge their portrayals of Tibetan experience, as well as how each medium's distinct characteristics influence the exile narratives. Another gap is the need for more diverse and cultural perspective in Tibetan culture output. Much of the previous research has been on earlier works of notable figures such as the Dalai Lama, famous authors, other filmmakers. However, there is less emphasis on fresh voices and emerging innovators in Tibetan diaspora, particularly those who address more recent changes in Tibetan exile, such as the impact of globalization and new technology media. Exploring these modern perspectives may provide a richer and more nuanced understanding of changing representation of Tibetan life in exile. Likewise, there is a steady deficit of understanding the reception of influence of Tibetan culture performance across audience. While there has been some research how Tibetan cinema and literature are appreciated in the diaspora community, less emphasis has been made on how these works are regarded by larger international audiences. Understanding these reception process could shed light on how Tibetan tales shape global perception and contribute to cultural exchanges. Moreover, the relationship between Tibetan representation and other socio-political issues such as environmental concerns, gender dynamics, and the diaspora is underexplored. For instance, Tibetan literature and films frequently address issues of environmental degradation and gender norms, but these are not necessarily the primary subject of inquiry. Addressing these connections could improve our understanding of Tibet culture representation and highlight the diverse nature of its exile experience. Ultimately, there is a need of more multidisciplinary approaches that incorporate findings from sociology, anthropology, and cultural studies. Such interdisciplinary research could provide a more comprehensive understanding of how Tibetan life in exile is represented and experienced, combining textual and visual analysis with a broader socio-cultural and political circumstances. Addressing these gaps could lead to a better understanding of Tibetan exile narratives as well as more thorough and inclusive studies of cultural representation and diaspora experience. What I included in this paper was also the psychological effect of war and exodus on common people and children. War and forced evacuation have a far-reaching and varied psychological impact on individuals and communities. Common people's experience with displacement and conflict frequently result in a variety of mental health issues, including trauma, anxiety, depression. War-related turmoil can disrupt social institutions and relocate family and result in the loss of home and livelihood, all contributing to the psychological suffering. Children are especially sensitive to repercussion of conflict and displacement. The experience of being uprooted from their families and subjected to violence can have serious long-term effect on their mental health and development through consequences are frequently exacerbated by the insecurity of refugee camp, the loss of educational opportunities, and the breakup of familial and social supportive structure. Children exposed to conflict and displacement are more likely to acquire PTSD and other trauma-related disorders. Symptoms may include intrusive memories, nightmares, emotional numbness, and ongoing danger of violence and combined sense of loss, such as death of loved ones, destruction of home, can permanently persist in the mood of the anxiety and insecurity. One of the most unsettling consequences of war and displacement is unchilding, a process in which stressful experience could cause the loss of childhood innocence and growth. Children who have been through war and displacement may prematurely assume adult responsibilities such as caring for younger siblings and contribute to the family income. This transition can impede their emotional and psychological development since they are pushed to encounter adult issues and deal with challenges that are well beyond their age. Displaced children's cognitive and emotional development can be influenced by the stress and trauma they have encountered. Chronic stress can disrupt brain development and impairing memories, attention and learning abilities, and emotional development can be delayed if youngsters struggle with trust, self-esteem and the ability to build positive relationships. The loss of traditional trauma structures and community can further isolate children and make it difficult for them to adjust to new situations. These isolation can worsen the feeling of loneliness and alienation in children, making it difficult for them to develop social skills and form supportive relationships in the new environment. Psychological effect of war and displacement on children can last into adulthood, impairing their overall well-being, ability to deal with further pressure, and address these challenges. Comprehensive mental health support is required including trauma-informed care, emotional support, and community building effort to assist children and families into healing and rebuilding their lives. Now, the key text and themes which I explored in this paper was first the Snow Lion's Turquoise Mane by Jamyang Nobu. Jamyang Nobu's novel is a notable contribution to the Tibetan exile writing set in the background of Tibet's volatile political scene. It tells the narrative of Tibetan exile in India who is torn between his traditional heritage and modern world. Nobu's story delves into topics of identity and cultural preservation, the conflict between traditional ideals and cultural challenges experienced by Tibetans in exile. His literature explores the complexities of living between the worlds as well as the battle to sustain Tibetan identity in the face of relocation. Second was The Cup by Khetse Nobu. Despite being largely a film, The Cup by Mr. Nobu, a Tibetan Lama and filmmaker, is an important text to comprehend Tibetan life in exile. The film set in a Tibetan monastery in India follows a young monk who is passionate about football, emphasizing their desire to participate with the contemporary world while remaining true to their monastic responsibility. This story is funny, it's hilarious, but yet a heartbreaking discussion of difficulties transferring traditional ideals into modern surroundings. It represents a broader reality of Tibetan youngsters in exile. Second is Beyond the Lhasa Moon by Sering Wangmo Dhompa. Sering Wangmo Dhompa's poetry collection Beyond the Lhasa Moon digs deep into the themes of grief, memory, identity. She frequently contrasts the tranquil beauty of Tibet with the hard realities of exile. Her work depicts the emotional and psychological effect of relocation and employing a vivid images and poetic language to portray the agony of leaving one's birthplace and the need for cultural continuity. A Prayer for the Living by Lamo Dawa is my third book. It's the Memoir by Lamo Dawa describes author's personal journey from Tibet to exile. Dawa's book provides a vivid depiction of programs that the Tibet refugees confront, including the struggle to adjust to new circumstances while maintaining their cultural and religious practices. Now, I'll just skip forward to the recurring themes which come in Tibetan representation in literature. The first theme is loss and longing. The sensation of loss and longing for one's homeland is a common theme in Tibetan exile. These works frequently address the emotional weight of being estranged from one's birthplace, nostalgia of lost culture and environment, and the grief over displacement of old way of life. The longing for Tibet acts as a powerful undercurrent, creating narratives that are expressing the Tibet diaspora's collective anguish. Second is cultural preservation. Another key issue is the fight to preserve Tibetan culture in midst of displacement in a foreign land. This encompasses the difficulty of preserving cultural traditional language, the religious ceremonies in the new settings, and literature frequently depicts the conflict between preserving cultural legacy and adapting to the realities of exile. Text emphasizes on how cultural preservation is both a personal and social undertaking, requiring both resistance to cultural knowledge and adaptability of changing circumstances. Identity and adaptation. The examination of identity is central to the Tibetan literature. Exile causes Tibetans to confront complex issues of identity, balancing their cultural roots and the need for integrate into a new society. The themes of identification frequently connect with discussions of adaptation as characters struggle to keep their Tibetan identity while dealing with their new cultures. And resilience and resistance. Despite the hardship of exiles, Tibetan literature frequently emphasizes of themes of resilience and resistance. These texts celebrate the strength and determination of Tibetan people to preserve their culture, spiritual values against the odds, and this theme underscores the adaptability and endurance of Tibetan diaspora, portraying the struggle as part of the broader narrative of survival and resistance. And that's my paper. I won't go on because I'll just cross my time limit. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hasan. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Perhaps you'll be able to deliberate more during the course of the Q&A session. Right. So the next speaker we have Dorjee Negi, and he is a research scholar at Nalanda Mahavira University in Bihar, and he's going to be speaking on the status of Tibetan language from the perspective of ethical studies. So, Negi, आपके पास 20 मिनट है.
Thank you. Good morning to all of you. First, I would like to express my gratitude to all the staff of the Tibetan Policy Institute for giving me this opportunity to come here and present my paper. Additionally, I would like to extend my special heartfelt thanks to Dr. Dorjee and my dear friend Kongkya Pasang. Without their support, I would not be here today. Before reading the paper, I feel it is necessary to say 2 lines about myself. Basically, I am a Tibetan and Hindi medium student, and I am also writing my thesis in Tibetan and Hindi. The topic of my research is in Hindi, तिब्बती विद्वानों की रचनाओं में नैतिक शिक्षा की अवधारणा, the concept of ethics in the works of Tibetan scholars. So as a Hindi student, I may make many mistakes in pronunciation, so please be kind enough to correct me whenever I make mistakes. Now I begin my paper. In today's world, the Tibetan language, despite is one of the richest languages in the world, it is rapidly despairing for the fact that the study of Tibetan language has been completely banned by Chinese government in all the government and private school recently, and it is restriction were imposed on the monasteries inside Tibet, while Tibetan youth in the free world, in the diaspora, in the countries like India, etc., are interested in other languages like English than their own language. This situation indicates the status and condition of the Tibetan language, where preservation of the Tibetan language is very significant for this rich and unique culture, especially for its spiritual practices and secular heritage, including ethical studies. From the point of usage of languages, Tibetan language may be less as compared to other languages, but in the view of moral ethical learning and teaching, the Tibetan language is one of the best languages. So we just need to learn Tibetan language. As we can find more than 700 ethical books in the Tibetan language, written by Tibetan scholars and some of the Indian great scholars like Acharya Nakachun, Aradeva, Assam, etc. Indian scholars were used to writing in Sanskrit, but unfortunately we lost in Sanskrit. Because of the great Tibetan and Indian translator, we have all the ethical books in Tibetan language. So we can understand how important the Tibetan language is in the current world for the learning ethical studies, or we can imagine the status of the Tibetan language in the current world. Usefulness of the Tibetan language. The usefulness of Tibetan language is very important in today's context. Since the Tibetan language came into existence after the 7th century, Tibetan and Indian scholars have translated hundreds of Sanskrit texts into Tibetan language. The Sanskrit texts kept in the monasteries were destroyed during the attack by the Turks. As a result, after retranslating those texts preserved in the Tibetan language, we are able to become familiar with our culture. The excellence and value of language can be judged by the literature available in it. Tibetan language is no less than any other among the excellent ancient languages of the world. The wealth of classical texts written in it is not only present in India, but is also spread all over the world, from the Lichi in the east to America. The number of texts translated from Sanskrit to Tibetan alone is more than 10,000. Apart from this, the number of texts written independently by Tibetan scholars is countless. From the subject matter, the vast scriptures of various subjects like poetry, drama, grammar, astrology, Ayurveda or medical science, logic, Abhidhamma Shastra, Paramita Shastra, Dharma Shastra, ethics, Kama Shastra, Kala Shastra, and Tantra, etc. are available in this language. The textual collections of teachings of Gautam Buddha, known as Tripitaka, exist in 108 volumes in Tibetan language. This is the largest collection among the other collections in the world. Especially in the collection, only the texts related to the Tantra preached by Buddha are collected in 40 volumes. almost all the above mentioned texts which are originally written in the Sanskrit language. If we talk about importance of the Tibetan language, then it would be appropriate to say that in the absence of languages, no sanitary teaching can proceed smoothly. It is in the context that it has remained the medium of higher studies and teaching for the last 14, 15,000, 1400 years. The importance that Sanskrit language has in the plain areas in the India, the same importance is given to the Tibetan language in the Central Asia regions and Himalayan regions. In this area, inscriptions of various mantras and sutras are found in the languages, found in this language, which is probably not found in any other languages of the world. The special ability which is visible in Sanskrit language to express Indian spiritual topics, the same ability is present in the Tibetan language also. This is the reason why today study, teaching and research of this language is going on the most of the higher education institutions in the developed and developing regions of the world. Now my second point, the brief introduction to some original ethical texts composed by Tibetan scholars. The original Tibetan scholar, the origin of Tibetan scholar is composition of the ethical texts can be traced back to the 10 virtuous deeds of the gods and 16 pure human virtues formulated by the 33rd king of Tibet, Songtse Gampo. However, in Tibetan history, these were considered as moral teachings rather than formal texts. The first moral text composed by Tibetan scholar is regarded as Tamsing Tenpai To, which can still be read today. This text is structured as a dialogue between two brothers where they ask and answer 79 questions on various topics like religion and world, good and evil, acceptance and rejection, virtue and sin, wisdom and ignorance, etc. Question number 1 through 18 specially discuss the nature of happiness and sorrow and justice. As mentioned, Norgi Matung Sushigyu, Taktu Devar Depasu, Tedang Tungal Tamje Kyang, Yargun Jishin Jevarkur. It means who does not suffer from wealth, who remains happy forever. Happiness and sorrow are as changeable as summer and winter. This text is considered the first ethical text written during the Tibetan reign, although there is some debate among the scholars regarding the exact period of the composition. Later, during the feudal period, Domton Gelbe Jungne wrote the text Labja Micho Negi Thangwa, considered the first ethical text of the feudal period. It was composed in the response to the Nepal journey of the translator Nakso Lozawa Sultim Gelwa, with an emphasis on ethical behavior. During the Lamic reign, Sakya Pandita wrote the ethical text Lekshe Tulgitawa, which is considered the first ethical text of that era, based on Tamsing Tenpai To. This text is concise, profound in meaning, and easy to understand, providing moral education as well as religious guidance. In the early period of Gaden Phodang, the fifth Dalai Lama wrote the Lukjung Labja Muti Liu Thengwa, based on Lekshe Tulgitawa, at the request of Mongolian ministers for their instruction to their children. This text is primarily focused on human morality, such as stopping enmity and protecting one's sibling. Zapatu Rinpoche later composed educational texts inspired by these works. Now, my third point: why ethical and morality is important. We may find happiness through education and knowledge, but this is not guaranteed. However, morality always brings happiness and contentment. Morality plays a crucial role in our lives, helping us distinguish between right and wrong and enabling us to act correctly. Without morality, society cannot function properly. What is morality? It is a code of conduct that make an individual virtue, honest and fair. Morality provides us with the guidance to live balanced and joyful life. Without morality, society would face conflicts, insecurity, and incompetence. For example, if son does not respect his father at home, how will the family function? If brother does not respect his sister, how will things run smoothly? This lack of morality makes us insensitive, leading us to live like Charvak, adopting the motto eat, drink, and marry. We would not longer believe in the concept of karma, virtue, and sin. The mindset reflects Darwin's theory of survival of fittest, which implies that only the strongest will survive, leaving no room for the weak and helpless. In my view, this ideology contribute to the outbreak of the World War I and World War II. Although historians may present different arguments, however, I believe Darwin's theory of evolution promotes division among humans, and where division exists, morality cannot progress. While some of Darwin's theory may have advanced the world, this theory of evolution undermined morality. If everyone starts thinking only of themselves, society cannot function because we are social beings who depend on each other. If someone considers themselves all powerful, how can society survive? It cannot. Therefore, we must emphasize morality. The famous Tibetan scholar Sakya Pandita Kungai Kachan in his text Sakya lecture wrote, Tamba Dulwe Rangshin Kyong, Nyenba Rengbe Rangshin Duk, Teten Shingi Rangshin Sung, Shinkam Rengbe Rangshin Sek. This means that just a fruitful tree protects both itself and others, and dry withered tree burns itself and others. So too does a moral person contribute to the welfare of both themselves and society. Therefore, morality in personal life is essential. If we practice morality in our personal life, we become a role model for society. A recent incident from Himachal Pradesh, Sirmaur district, Kamal Thakur, a bus driver from Ronath village in the Shilai subdivision, set out 6 a.m. on Tuesday, September 1, 2023, on the Nahan Kuhat route, along with 35 kilometers journey from Nahan to Tadahu. He received several calls from home but could not answer. Upon reaching the Tadahu bus station, Kamal learned that his father, Tek Chand Thakur, had passed away. The conductor Sachin immediately arranged a taxi for Kamal, advising him to go to home to his grieving family. However, Kamal turned around to look at the bus full of children, elderly, women, and other passengers, and asked who would take the bus to its destination. He wiped his tears and said, "The passengers also have important reason for traveling. I will perform my father's last ride only after ensuring the passengers reach the destination." This act of selflessness moved the conductor and passengers to tears. This story shows that person living by moral principle not only improve their own life but also benefit others. The responsibility of imparting moral education begins with parents. In the Tibetan text on morality, it said, "Ame khala kochak gyabdangna, thugu chagui gyalgo chenyeyo." This means a mother seals her mouth and does not teach her children moral values, the door to the children is misfortunate open. Not only will the children suffer, but the entire family and society may face misfortunate, as one immoral person can outweigh 100 moral ones. The best example of promoting morality in the 21st century, His Holiness the Great 14th Dalai Lama, he has dedicated his life to the welfare of others and the betterment of all the living beings. His teaching on compassion, kindness, and ethical behavior have benefited people of all faiths, including atheists. His Holiness advocates for universal responsibility. There must be a thought of welfare of others. Compassion is the root of such thoughts, and therefore love and kindness are essential. As I have always said, where there is love and kindness, there will be happiness, and this will benefit not only individual but also society at large. This statement reinforces the importance of the practicing morality in both personal and social life for the betterment of society and oneself. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's a very rich presentation. So much to explore, particularly when we think about morality and this text. How does it really inform societies, social regulation, kingship, and codification of laws, and all these things, and particularly with your ethnographic note about how this text and the ideas behind it still sort of informs contemporary Canary society. So thank you for this very interesting presentation. So the next presenter we have, Jeheru Bhuyan, who is all the way from Kerela, and he is a research scholar at Darul Huda Islamic University, Kerala, and he's going to speak on literature and identity assertion, a comparative analysis of Tibetan resistance in exile and Indian local poetry. So you have 20 minutes.
Good morning, everyone. Tashi Dalek, respected chair of this panel, and the speakers and the other distinguished personalities present here. My name is Jeheru Bhuyan. I am originally from Assam and pursuing my post-graduation in Darul Huda Islamic University in Kerala. And to say about myself, I can proudly say that I have represented India in the 7th International University Debate Championship organized by Qatar Foundation in Doha on May this year. So today's presentation is a part of my master's thesis, which is about the resistance literature and the assertion of identity. So in this particular presentation, I will be presenting on the literature and the identity assertion, a comparative analysis of Tibetan resistance in exile and Indian local poetry. Indian local poetry, that means particularly I will be comparing the Dalit literature and the Mia poetry in Assam. So firstly, in the field of post-colonial writing, Barbara Harlow's resistance literature is one of the foundational texts that introduces the readers to the role of literature in the liberation movements of the developing countries during the 20th century. Harlow credits Ghassan Kanafani's book, Literature of Resistance in Occupied Palestine, as the origin of this terminology, resistance literature. So resistance literature originates from the struggles of marginalized communities against the domination, subjugation that is rooted in anti-colonialism and imperialism. and the circulation of resistance narratives to assert identity and preserve socio-political traditions of a community, particularly in matters related to migration, discrimination, racism, and social injustice, is widespread in many countries. For example, during the Harlem Renaissance, African American writers like Langston Hughes and Zora Neale challenged racial stereotypes and celebrated their black culture that is similar to the resistance narratives found in Palestine, Nicaragua, and South Africa, and also Maori resistance in New Zealand and the Kurdish resistance in Turkey. So, to say about the Indian context, the subaltern movement by the Dalit literature as called Varnas, untouchables, and the Mia poetry of the Muslim Bengali community of Assam region, and just like that, the Tibetan resistance poetry in exile. So this paper will try to attempt to understand the Tibetan poetry in exile by analyzing its major similarities with resistance poetry in Indian resistance literature, particularly within the literature of Dalit and the Mia of Assam. So to say about the Tibetan poetry, that it serves as a form of resistance to Chinese colonization and the resulting mass migration of Tibetans to various parts of India, including India. So this paper will be dealing with the three questions. Firstly, what is meant by resistance poetry and literature, and how can it be interpreted within the context of Tibetan and Indian literature? Secondly, how do socio-political factors contribute to the relevance of resistance and liberation movements in contemporary debates and dialogues? And thirdly, how resistance poetry in exile and present-day Tibetan poetry are connected and how both influence each other. So the paper will be following historical, political, and anthropological frames. However, it will examine the socio-political phenomenon of resistance poetry and literature. And it will be also going through some secondary sources like journal articles, interviews, academic research works, and publications blogs of the respective poets of Tibetan and Dalit and the Mia poet. So let's begin with the Tibetan resistance of Tibetan literature of resistance. The Tibetan poetry acts as a form of resistance against Chinese colonization and mass migration rooted in Indic Buddhist beliefs. Tibetans maintain non-violent stance that distinguish their resistance from other post-colonial movements like Palestine. Primarily, Tibetan poetry lacked global reach due to its language, because most of the works were written in Tibetan. But the Tibetan diaspora has translated these works into English or began writing in English with poets like Buchungdi Sonam, Sering Wangbodompa, Tenzin Sundu that draw scholarly attention and rising awareness of Tibetan issues worldwide. In Tibetan history, in exile and otherwise, poetry was more accepted and circulated than any other form of resistance or narratives. One of the primary reasons can be that most of the Tibetan religious texts were written in verse rather than prose. These texts were in the form of chants which were passed down from generation to generation. Fiction, prose, drama, and such other forms of literature were rarely used. As a result, poetry remained a significant tool to resistance, which tried to express their struggle against oppression with peace and nonviolence. The roots of this genre can be traced back to the broader context of Tibetan literature that has historically comprised both indigenous works and those influenced by the Indic Buddhist literature. So the contemporary Tibetan poets can be categorized into three generations. First generation poets are those who born and brought up in Tibet and were forced out of Tibet after the Chinese invasion of 1959. Their poetry primarily reflects on the rich heritage of Tibet, which celebrates its beauty and the cultural legacy. Gendun Chopel and Dondup Gayal are the two names of prominent figures of this age. And the second stage, and the second generation poets were either born in exile or brought as a child after the Chinese invasion. Exile is a central theme in their poetry, often that reflect feelings of disillusionment. Notable poets from this generation include Dondup, Lasang Sering, and Gyalpo Sering, and Sultan Shakappa. The third generation are those poets who are born and raised in exile. Their poetry more often explores themes of alienation, continuity, assimilation, and memory. And some notable figures are Tenzin Swindu, Sering Wangbo Dompa, and Jandun Sopel Jr. So let's talk about the Dalit literature of resistance. Dalit literary movements in the mid-20th century to address the systematic oppression faced by the Dalit community in India that were historically labeled as untouchables under the Varna system and often stereotyped as sweepers or cleaners. The term Dalit can be, the meaning of the Dalit is broken, that has gained prominence in the 1930s with significant literary movements that has gained global attention after India's independence in 1947. And the Dalit literature can be traced back to Buddhist literature and Marathi Bhakti poets like Gora and Chakra. The movement gained momentum in the late 1960s that influenced by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who was the architect of Indian Constitution. The term Dalit literature was firstly used in 1958 at the Maratha and at the Maharashtra Dalit Sahitya Sangha conference that was initially focused on Marathi literature, but it later on spread to Hindi, Kannada, Telugu, Malayalam, and Tamil. Dalit literature focuses on asserting identity that fight against social discrimination, deprivation, and sexual exploitation as resisting caste-based stereotypes. Dalit writers have created realistic, experience-based, and authentic literature that challenges upper caste hegemony in society and literature. Dalit poets such as the Om Prakash Valmiki, Namdev Desal, and Shankar Kumar Limbale, Meena Kandaswamy are some of the prominent figures in this Dalit poetry resistance. So to talk about the Mia literature of resistance, Mia poetry serves as a form of resistance against systematic marginalization and social discrimination that represented the rich identity of Mia community through their native Bengali dialects. The genre gained prominence after April 29, 2016, when Dr. Hafiz Ahmed shared "Write Down I Am a Mia," a poem on his Facebook page that prompted very responses from other poets that included Salim M. Hussain, Shahjahan Ali, and Ashraful Hussain. This initiated a vast movement that included contributions from 15 poets across Assam during that time. The genre can be categorized into three phases. The first phase is the genre origins can be traced to the 1939 poem, the title A Charua's Proposition by Bande Ali Mia, who was a writer, journalist, graphic artist, and designer from Bangladesh. In the second phase, the poem I Beg to State That by Khabir Ahmed, published in 1985 in the wake of the Nelly massacre of 1983 and the rise of the AJP. That marked first genuine expression of Mia identity and initiated a wave of protest poetry among the Mia or Chorchapuri community. Because the Nili massacre, the Bengali Muslims, more than 2,000 were killed within 6 hours at night. In the third phase, the poem Write Down I'm a Mia by Dr. Hafiz Ahmed, published in his personal Facebook page, that followed by other 16 poets in a series that the key figures like Rehna Sultana, Shahjahan Ali Ahmed, Qazi Sharwar Hussain. So we analyze so I have done a textual analysis of these three literature. So firstly, I would like to discuss the textual analysis of Tibetan poetry. Poem by Gendum Chopel, translated by Donald Lopez. It says that the old sayings that contain the seeds of truth, the footprints of the rabbit that jumped to the wondrous mountain. When one enters the forest of faded wisdom, who can distinguish right from wrong? And the second poem from the first generation of this Tibetan poet, written by Dondup that was translated by Loyal Cook. It says that the sky blue and clear, sunlight warm and gentle, earth vast and wide, flowers beautiful and charming, mountains high and mighty. This is the waterfall of youth, the youth of snowy Tibet. So both poems emphasize the beauty of nature and its connection to wisdom. The first poem envisions the challenges of discriminating right from wrong in the forest of faded wisdom, while the second one captures the vibrant essence of the Tibet as a source of youthful insight. Then we can say that they both convey in a sense of wonder and introspection. From the second generation poem, Lasang Sering say that Tibet needs you before your people are totally wiped out, before the land is completely destroyed, before your culture is irreversibly lost. Your country needs you now. And the second poem, the wait for freedom moves at a turtle's pace and sometimes turns about, driving everyone waiting to their wits' end by saying Galpo. These two poems highlight the urgent needs to protect Tibetan heritage. Sering calls for immediate action to save culture and land from devastation, while the Galpo captures the frustration of a painfully slow fight for freedom. So both poems express a profound concern for Tibetan identity and the necessity for activism. And the third generation, the poet Tenzin says in his poem Refugee. So both poems says address themes of displacement and identity. Sundu portrays the struggles of refugee facing cultural loss, while Wangmo Dompa reflects on feelings of isolation in an altered world. So the textual analysis of Dalit poetry, in these two poems that explore the themes of oppression and the alienation faced by marginalized communities, just like the Valmiki critiques land ownership and exploitation, that question what belongs to the oppression. Desal uses vivid imagery to express the pain of systematic violence and identity loss. So here are the two poems that I have analyzed to say what the themes they are exploring. So if we talk about the poems from the Mia poetry, there was a poem by Dr. Hafiz Ahmed. It says that, write down, I'm a Mia. My serial number in the NRC is 200543. I have two children. Another is coming next summer. Will you hate him as you hate me? And the another one, so both poems says the themes of identity and the resilience amid discrimination. So these both poems as a series of poetry by the Dr. Hafiz Ahmed. Then it was responded by Shalim M. Hussain as he says that he asserts that empowerment and they have a verification of their identity from their own community. So in the last, I would say that the Mia poetry, the motives of the Mia poetry are systematic marginalization, linguistics, dialectical narratives, social discrimination, ethnicity, and religion. That's why the themes of these poems are basically based on the identity and belonging, nature and environment, resistance and protest, relationality, socio-political critique, and gender equality. In the second, Dalit poetry, the motives of Dalit literature is social injustice, caste systems, and ethnic identity. That's why their poems based on the fighting against social discrimination, deprivation, sexual exploitation, caste-based stereotypes, and identity assertion. And the Tibetan poetry, the motives are displacement, loss of identity, homelessness, and in-betweenness, that means the stuck between identities. That's why the themes are on the issues of identity, continuity, memory, alienation, assimilation, and homecoming. And also, the three aspects The Tibetan poetry and the Dalit poetry in the aspects of cultural identity, it's very strong. But in case of Maya poetry, it's just emerging, just like I said, the series of this Maya poetry emerged after 2016. And in case the Tibetan poetry, in the aspect of social identity, it's struggling. But in case of Dalit poetry, it's resilient. And the Maya poetry, it's getting marginalized as the current political situation can be seen. In the third one, in the aspect of personal identity, the Tibetan poetry are evolving, and the Dalit poetry are assertive, and the Maya poetry are seeking recognition from their poetry and their on all narratives. So thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Bhuyan. Such a very, very interesting presentation. Particularly, it reminds me of the idea that was proposed by Anna Singh, where she says that friction is a very interesting site for academic inquiry. So particularly for bringing these three subaltern threads and their narratives and how they are expressed and represented into conversation. So that was very interesting. So thank you very much. Please. So the next presenter, we have Anjumara Hussain, who is a research scholar at Birangana, Sati, Sadhani, Rajyik Vidyashala in Assam, and she's going to speak on the body in Kamala Shamsi's Burned Shadows, 2009, and Sringyamzom Lama's We Measure the Earth with Our Bodies, a comparative study. So you have 20 minutes.
Good afternoon, everyone, respected dignitaries, my fellow people presenters. I'm Anjumara Hussain. I've come from Assam. The topic for my presentation is the body in Kamala Shamsi's Burned Shadows, that was published in the year 2009, and Sharin Yangzom Lama's We Measure the Earth with Our Bodies, 2022, a comparative study. My paper mainly focuses on the idea of body, for which I have chosen two texts that I have already mentioned. In my paper, I have tried to draw insight from the broad concept of feminism, gender studies, the difference between sex and gender, for which I have drawn upon insights from Simone de Beauvoir, Pramod K. Nair, Merleau Ponty, to enhance the understanding of the thesis of my paper. Moreover, I have also referred to the idea of liminality, third space, identity, and so on to fulfill the purpose of my paper. Now, I would like to read out my major patches of my paper. Simone de Beauvoir once said that one is not born, but rather becomes a woman. This view proposes that in gender studies, the term gender should be used to refer to the social and cultural construction of masculinity and femininity, and not to the state of being male or female in its entirety. By this, she means that the essence of a woman is always created, physically, socially, politically, economically, and culturally, by historical developments which serve the interest of men. In her renowned introduction to the second sex, de Beauvoir points out the fundamental symmetry between the terms masculine and feminine. A man thinks of his body as a direct and normal connection, while the world which he believes he apprehends objectively, whereas he regards the body of a woman as a hindrance, a prison. Women has ovaries, a uterus. These peculiarities imprison her in her subjectivity, circumscribe her within the limit of her own nature. Next, I would like to pick up an important reference from Pramod K. Nair's book, which I have referred in my references section. Nair writes many bodies which, such as black women, the differently able, the queer, have historically been excluded from the public political sphere. As a result, these bodies have always been only objects of oppression, welfare, history, control, but never subjects of their own lifestyle, choices, future, or identity. They have been granted identity but not allowed to develop one for themselves. Whatever political claims and rights have been generated in the late 20th century was because those who have been denied these rights have fought with and for their bodies. So if we are to consider the later views and development of feminism as developed by Judith Butler, Lewis Irigaray, and Helen Sixers, that identity is embodied performance, contingent and shifting, some pertinent questions are raised, such as, does people of particular bodies, such as square, black, colored, get a right to claim anything based on their bodies? Does a minority or a different body get an agency to claim rights or citizenship like the ones that are subjects with agencies and rights? Based on the above given notions and arguments, the present paper tries to make a comparative study on the idea of body on the basis of the two texts that I have already mentioned. The body may be said as an agency that is performative in the identity-making process by questioning, resisting, and subverting certain set of norms and conventions. One of the embodied performances of the body is that it acts as an agency of the past, and the physical body shifts from one place to another. The body carries with it the memories of the past on an individual as well as a collective level. Adding on to the individual and collective aspects, there are the religious, cultural, political, historical motives and episodes. The body acts as an agency to construct identity by refusing the reiteration of certain practices, norms, and conventions, by trying to resist to a kind of power by acting on people's actions and thus framing their identities into a given structure. The paper shall also focus on to understand the idea that the select characters do not possibly adapt or readapt their lives to the changes caused by certain political and historical events in their life. The paper will be a comparative analysis between both the women characters in the select text. In case of Hiroko, that is the protagonist of Burnt Shadows, the paper focuses that how the body is used to resist the set definitions of a hibakusha by trying to understand the fact that identity is not constructed by any set geographical, linguistic, or cultural norms. Rather, the body can be situated in a third space where it becomes a performative act by questioning and resisting the dominant narratives to construct identity. In Dolma's case, that we see in We Measure the Earth with Our Bodies, we see the idea of body allures to the concept of memories, personal, cultural, mythical, integrated into history. It is as if the Tibetans in their exodus had touched every part of their journey, literally and metaphorically. To know the value of one's land, one has to realize and internalize the struggles and tribulations that touched every generation. For Dolma, this whole idea was staggering, and thus her identity as a Tibetan refugee is constructed under different circumstances conditioned by social, political, cultural, religious, and historical events. Now, I would like to highlight the major discussion. At the core of the novel, Burnt Shadows, published in the year 2009, we have a Japanese woman, Hiroko Tanaka, who is presented by the author as a trans figure. She is a woman who encounters major historical events in the narrative, starting right from Nagasaki bombing of 1945 to the 9/11 attack in New York. As such, she becomes a transnational figure who surpasses national boundaries. Transnationalism refers to the movement of ideas, people, and capital across national borders in the modern global era. Transnationalism signals a different kind of analytical lens that emphasizes the connections and flows between different nation states, territories, and regions in the world. It expands on and departs from other notions of identity that were based on national borders and allows a focus on subjectivity, or ways that identities are always in process and constantly being inflected by different political, cultural, economic, and social factors. As a survivor of the bombing of Nagasaki, she is termed as a hibakusha, as reduced to bomb by the author. The character of Hiroko Tanaka, a Japanese character, is always in a process of creating her identity. She cannot run away from the idea that she is a hibakusha. At the same time, she tries to establish her selfhood by negating the very conventional idea of being a hibakusha. The paper tries to see, understand, and justify that how the body tries to meet the quest for identity, which becomes personal and ongoing process of creating the self, and ultimately becomes a globalized character who, more than anything else, is humane. In his book Phenomenology of Perception, Merleau-Ponty argues that the body is the primordial existence of natural life. According to Ponty, body is fundamental for communication and understanding others. He further writes that the living process of interacting with the world and others, but also as a process of establishing one's selfhood. In the text Burnt Shadows, it is seen that the author Kamila Samshi has depicted Hiroko as a progressive and adaptive character who believes in moving ahead. She does not completely accept her very identity of a hibakusha and instead transgresses boundaries to manifest the very idea of selfhood. The bombing of Nagasaki has left its traumatic effect on Hiroko physically and mentally, which is described by Shamshi as diamond cutting open the earth, falling through her. The novel not only presents Hiroko Tanaka's personal loss, but also marks the larger, worldwide tragedies in history that does not provide any detail of such major events. Instead, it provides a view of how these events play out at duality between larger historical moments and private intimate memories played out on the site of the body. In brief, Samshi privileges the body in the description of events. The scene of the devastating bomb attack of Nagasaki is crucial. Before the dropping of the bomb, Hiroko, on the verge of an age where she experiences the sensuousness of love. Now, in case of, one more aspect I would like to highlight regarding Hiroko's character. Today, Americans who once in Japan tried to study the consequences of the atomic bomb on the survivors treated Hiroko as a crucial medical case. Even it was believed that her miscarriage was a result of the harmful effects of the bomb attack. The body then moves forward where there is a physical shift from Japan to Delhi. Hiroko tells the Burton family that she had come a long way from Nagasaki to Tokyo, where she worked as a translator for some time, and then she moves to Delhi. The third space, the bird-shaped burns now never allows her to overcome the traumatic memory of the attack. Yet it is the same body which in different contexts constructs her identity. Constructing identity becomes important by knowing and identifying the self. The relationship between body and self is fundamental through the whole novel because Hiroko performs her identity through it. The fact that the bird-shaped burns is a constant reminder of the nuclear explosion which seems to be a burden on her body. Nevertheless, she uses her body to free herself from the scheme in which her body has been framed. In Burnt Shadows, the protagonist's agency produces a third space where she negotiates her identity in opposition to certain rules and in relation to different languages and diverse cultural and social positions. The body easily transgresses national boundaries as well as acquaints itself with different languages. Hiroko Tanaka is, now I will move to Dolma's character. Drawing on the same insights from Ponty's work, the idea of body can be analyzed in the Tibetan work of fiction. Just like Hiroko, the Tibetan women characters of Dolma's family are weaved in the same thread of Chinese occupation of Tibet, which has inflicted tragedy over the family across generations. Just like Hiroko surpasses across nations, time, and characters, similarly, the Tibetan family undergo shifts from one place to another, from the corporeal zone to another, to meet the never-ending consequences of the great Tibetan exodus. As such, we see how their lives are affected by the loss and suffering caused by political and historical events, mainly as a result of the act by Chinese communists of Tibet. The suffering is not only personal but also collective. Such events know that how these larger political, historical, and social events juxtapose with the lives of the native people and disrupt their harmony. Moreover, the consequences play out on the site of the body, which may have meaning and connotation at different levels. As discussed above, Merleau-Ponty's philosophy that the body is dialectical, dynamic, and a becoming process can also be applied to Lama's work. The idea of body is not only confined to one particular context. We see different social, political, cultural, and religious episodes where the idea of body at different levels of understanding is central to those events. The self of the family at the center of the novel transcends the episodes that are at the surface level and surpasses through generations. However, the body across generations is the same one that has its land and that has become part of the exodus, and the one that is now refugee, searching for their lost identity. Similar to Samshi, Lama's text does not deal with a body in a single socio-cultural or political circumstance. The body in both the text is a traveling body. It becomes a narrative of the episodes and encounters between the socio-cultural circumstances of the point of the origin of the body and the social cultural circumstances of the spatio-temporal location that it occupies. In case of Lama's work, Dolma and the other major women characters perceive the idea of body at different levels, conditioned by different circumstances. Now, I would like to conclude. Thus, the paper tries to make a comparative study on the idea of the body in the select text. The analysis makes use of both the select text and draws insights from different theories and concepts on the idea of body. In Samshi, we see the body as a means to question and resist the set definition of a hibakusha, whereas in Lama's work, we see how the body serves at different levels, depicting various connotations. The common thread between the two ideas on body is that they are minority bodies of an individual who are hardly given any agency to claim their rights and privileges. They are in a constant act of traveling body, not confided to a single socio-cultural, political, or any other context. Hiroko is a hibakusha, a deformed body, and Dolma, in case, and also her mother, Lamo, comes from a Tibetan community who is largely affected by the Chinese occupation of their land. They have their own struggles and challenges in which they hardly get proper agency to assert their position. Thus, the paper locates those struggles, pain, loss, and suffering projected as a result of historical events inflicted on body, personal as well as at a collective level. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hussain. Thank you for this wonderful presentation. So with this, we will open to anyone who wanted to raise any questions to our panelists. And आप अपने सवाल